Hi, I'm Lee Miller, and I'm one of the owners of the Chadds Ford Winery, located in Chester County in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. And we're here to give you a little tour of a working winery so you can see how it operates, how we grow the grapes, and just what we do here, and learn a little bit about Pennsylvania's wine industry. Now we're starting out here in our vineyard. This is a very small vineyard that's located on the property where the winery is. We'll be going to the winery later. This vineyard is here on the property so that visitors can see what vines actually look like. Now, in the end, winemaking is an agricultural business, so our main job is to grow grapes. We can't make good wines unless we have good grapes. What you're looking at here is a young vineyard. These vines are about 5 years old. And the older part is the part down here that you see, the woody part. We have two trunks here on the vine, and we've brought them up and trained them to come out in a cordon system. So this is what is the permanent part of the vine right here. In the winter we prune them back, and then each year we get the new growth, which is all the green stuff you see coming up here. Now in this part of the country versus other areas where it's warmer, we tend to keep our vines up high. We have them on a 3-wire system, you can see here. And the purpose of the wires is to take all these big canes, that's what we call these little shoots that are coming off here, and we give them something to hold on to. You've seen grapevines, they develop these little tendrils here. These are old ones on the wire, here are some new ones. See, they attach themselves. And we kind of help them out every so often. We tuck them up here so that they will come along the wires. Now what you're seeing here are young growth. So if you can see these little clusters in here, these are the actual grapes. A while ago when these started growing, they were little buds, and then they develop into these clusters, and you can see they're going to have grapes on them. Most of our work takes part in the early part of the year, but as the season goes on, these continue to grow. Now, believe it or not, these are red grapes here. These are going to develop color in another month or so. Although they're green now, they will become red grapes. We call this Shawn Burson. And they're going to become big bunches about this big, which we will then pick when they're ripe. You can see that they're on this vine here, and even on, let's look at this little one here. Here's a smaller vine. There are actually quite a few clusters. Take a look at some of these shoots over here. Here's a big one, look at that. These have got a lot of clusters, and we might find that there's too many for so small a vine here. This one has been replanted, so it's a lot smaller than the first one we were looking at. But one of the things we're going to do before these develop any further is we're going to come in here and cluster thin. In other words, we're going to pick some off. Let me get one here that's an extra one, maybe this one. And we're going to take them off. I'm going to throw them away because we don't want this vine to have too much crop. The amount you get from a particular vine is based on what you allow it to grow. It will automatically, as you see these, a lot of these have a lot of grapes on. They're going to push as much as they can, but we want to take care of this. We want to protect the grapevine itself, so we don't want to let it have too much growth. We want a lot of its work to go into the vine. And every year we want kind of a small crop, but this vine is not ready for a real big crop. So we're going to keep fixing up these vines here. I'm going to put some up here on the wire. Get them up there. The reason I'm doing this is to get maximum sunlight. The sun is what's going to develop the sugar in the grapes. So we want to expose them, get the leaves up there. See, and then they'll automatically stay up there. Whoops, here's another one. Once these grapes are finished, when they're big bunches and they have enough sugar, then we're going to pick them from all the different vineyards that we have, and we're going to take them into the winery, and we're going to begin making wine. So that's the next step in the process.
Hi, I'm Eric Miller. I'm the other half of the winemaking team here at the Chadds Ford Winery. My wife and I are proprietors here. And I'm the winemaker. That means that I spend a lot of time in the cellar and laboratory, but also a lot of time in the vineyards. And after the growing season, which starts in May and ends in sometime in September, the grapes arrive here. So I'm going to show you through the processing area and how things work. The grapes arrive about where you're standing now, and they're transferred by forklift up to this hopper. And the grapes then are transferred, they're augered out here into this device. This is called a stemmer crusher. And the whole cluster falls in. This end enters this perforated screen tube, and the paddles on the inside rotate as does the exterior, and the berries fall down through to the bottom, and the stems stay inside the tube until they're forced out the end. So down below here is where the broken berries fall out. Broken berries fall out, and they're transferred by this odd-looking pump through a hose that connects here, goes all the way up over to here on the press. Now, this press may look like an odd device to you. It's really a state-of-the-art piece of equipment. It's called a membrane press. Inside here is a tank. It holds the equivalent of about 8 tons of grapes. And we fill up this tank and then seal off the end where that valve was. And then inside the tank is a bladder. The bladder's expanded. Yeah, you can probably take a look in there. This is the bladder. The bladder's expanded. It squeezes the grapes against the interior of the press, and then the juice drips out these small holes on the outside of the tank. It's caught by this trap right here. The juice goes into there, and then we pump it off into the cool cellars where we might add yeast. The fermentation temperatures are carefully controlled. If we're making red wines, we'd go from the stemmer crusher, we'd skip this part right here, we'd skip the press for now, and let me see, we'd head for this tank. Sorry about the long walk. This is a red wine fermentation tank. The reason that we ferment red wines with their skins is that the skins have got so much color and flavors. Now, if we were making a blush, we might just let it ferment for an hour or some very short period of time. If we're making a big, hefty red like the Shawn Burson Seven Valleys, then we let it sit in here for as long as a month. And so a great deal of flavor and color is extracted. And we actually mix the juice and the skins together periodically over the day. And then at some point, I say, it's ready. So we would open the valves, drain the juice off, and then open this door here. And then we just manually shovel these grapes out and transfer them over to the press, where the last of the juice is extracted. From here, just like the whites, the juice, or actually raw fermented wine, is transferred into the cellars where it's cool, where we have good temperature control, where it's closer to the laboratory and we can monitor things very closely. Come on in and we'll show you that part.
You're now standing in the cellars of the Chadds Ford Winery, and what you're looking at here are some big stainless steel tanks. These tanks are the actual place where we begin the winemaking process. As you were looking at our production area, we were making grape juice from the fresh grapes, and that juice is then brought in here through a series of hoses like this that we put onto the ends of these tanks. With a little pump, we'll take the wine that was outside and pump it right in here. I'm sorry, the juice. We'll pump the juice in here, and then we begin the fermentation. Fermentation is the actual winemaking process where we take this tank that's filled up with the young, very sweet grape juice, and we add yeast to it. And the yeast will mix with the juice and will begin consuming the sugar. The actual fermentation is when the yeast consumes the sugar and converts it to alcohol. Then we no longer have grape juice, we then have wine. Now, if we were doing that right now, let's see, this tank has Chardonnay in it. We have all the tanks identified by the different varieties that we make. If this Chardonnay juice were in the process of fermenting right now, it would be a very active, very hot process. Just like when you're using yeast to make bread, the yeast gets going and it generates heat. At some point, the yeast will consume all the sugar that's in that grape juice, and we will then have a young wine, and there's no more use for the yeast, and there's no more nutrients for it to eat. At that point, the yeast will die or become inactive, and they will then just settle out, all the yeast, and will float down here to the bottom of the tank. And it will, over a few weeks, it'll kind of settle there. Then we'll have a young wine in this tank, and we will have to clean it up and get rid of the yeast. That's why you see two valves on these tanks. We'll take this valve and pump out all of the young wine, pull it off the sediments and put it in another clean tank, and then everything below there, which will be the dirty yeast sediments, will just be run out and thrown away. At that point we have young wines, but they're certainly not drinkable. We have to take these wines and clean them up, get them off their sediments, and then move them into the next stage of winemaking, which is the aging, in which case we'll then move them along a little further. After the wines have finished their fermentations in our big tanks, then we enter a period we call aging. And there are two ways that we can age the wines. Some of the wines that are going to be the very light, fresh, fruity wines, the kind that you would drink as very young, fresh wines, those wines we will keep in stainless steel. We'll remove them off their sediments and just keep them there over the winter season so they can kind of rest and mature a little bit. But the other wines, the portion of the wines we make that we want to have big, rich, ripe, earthy characteristics, where we want to add complexity and character, those go into barrels, like these barrels that you're looking at here. These barrels are all made from oak, which is the kind of wood that's preferred in the wine business, and they come from different areas. You can see, if you look up here close, that these are French oak. This says it's from the Bordeaux region. Some barrels that we use are from forests in America, from Kentucky or out in the Midwest. I think Kansas does a lot of oak. But we use a lot of French oak, and these are various experiments we're doing, so they come from different forests. I see these over on this side come from the Burgundy region. This is Bordeaux. This one is from Bordeaux. And over here we have another one which is from the Burgundy area. And there are many other areas in France where they do barrels. Now the question is, does it matter? I mean, who cares where the wood is from? But in fact, in winemaking, it does matter. Different woods have different flavors, so to speak, and different characteristics. Now, what happens when the wine is in there? Why do we put wine in these barrels instead of keeping them in the tank? Well, there's a couple things that happen. One thing that happens here is that the wine evaporates because this is wood and it can breathe. It's not like a stainless steel tank. Now, if you look in here, you can see, I hope you can see, I'll get a little bit out here. This is red wine in there. Let's put a little bit up here so you can see it. This barrel is pretty full, it's right up to the top, but it will over time evaporate, and that causes the wine, put that in there, that causes the wine to condense and get bigger, richer flavors. The other thing that happens is that the wood on the inside is charred. These barrels are actually made over a fire in France, you know, where they bend the wood over the heat of the fire. And they have on the inside this toasting or this black charred area. And that adds to the flavors of the wine some smoky, toasty flavors that you may hear people talk about. And finally, as the wine is sitting in these barrels, it absorbs from the inside of the wood some textures and some flavors. So what you have are, suddenly the wine has texture, flavor, complexity, character, depending on what kind of wood it is and what kind of time that you keep the wine in there. Now, that's a good question. How long do the wines stay in barrels? That's entirely up to the winemaker. The winemaker provides the artistic side of winemaking versus the technical side, and he is like a chef, he or she. the winemaker will take the same raw material, and by the kind of wood he uses and the length of time that he keeps it in these barrels will determine the final outcome. Now here we barrel age at the Chadds Ford Winery for anywhere from a year to 3 years, depending again on what we're trying to make. At the end of that period, when the winemaker thinks it's ready, then we go off to the bottling line and we get these wines in the bottle. Now the final stage in making wine, or actually getting wine to you to drink, is to get it in the bottle. We're now standing in our bottling line. This is a whole machine here that's going to package the wines. What we're doing is we're starting with empty bottles and we're running them through a machine. It's going to do a number of functions here. The bottles are first going to be washed with sterile water. You can see them coming up and getting washed in this area, just a rinse really. The next thing that happens is that they will move into the filler. You can see them heading in that way now. The final stage in the packaging is to get a label. The bottles are next going to move into our labeling unit where they will get a label. You're going to put a front label on that identifies what the wine is, who made it, and in some cases, what the vineyard is. You see down here, I don't know if you can read this, this tells you where the vineyard is on this particular lot of wine. We come down to the end and we find our finished bottles, which have been filled and corked, capsuled, and labeled so that you can then identify that bottle and take it home and drink it. Most of the wines that you saw us bottling out there on the bottling line were the standard size, the 750 milliliter size that you typically would buy in a store. But occasionally we do interesting things at a winery, like this big bottle that you see here. Yes, this is a real bottle, and yes, we do sell them. Now, you're not going to find these in your average state store where they do sell Chadds Ford wines, but you will find them here at the winery if you ever get out here to visit. Now, this bottle, I believe, is called a Methuselah. I always get confused. There are many, many sizes of wine. I'll show you just a couple of these specialty bottles. Up here, I've got an old Cabernet Sauvignon. This is from 1983, and this is called a double Magnum. That holds 4 bottles of a regular size bottle of wine. Let's see what else I can here's another very interesting bottle. This is a 1982 Shawn Burson. That's a grape that not many people have heard about, but it's a very significant grape in Pennsylvania. These are both reds. And I think something interesting about this bottle is that it's dated back to 1982, which represents the first vintage that we made here at Chadds Ford Winery. My husband Eric, that you met in the processing area, and I moved here in '82 just to start this winery. We came to southeastern Pennsylvania because we thought it was the best area on the East Coast to grow grapes, which of course is the beginning of winemaking. So we started the winery here in '82. At that time, we were quite small. We made about 7,000 gallons. The Shawn Burson was one of them. And we have since grown. We've got lots of interesting things in here. Let's see what I can find. It's another Shawn Burson. We've got some, let's look at one of these bottles. This is a Chardonnay. Matter of fact, it's the same thing that we were bottling on the bottling line, but it's a bigger bottle. And this, what I was going to mention was that since 1982, when we started, we have now grown to produce about 60,000 gallons. Another interesting thing about some of these bottles, if you look at the vineyard names, now down here this says Stargazer's Vineyard. Over here we have Seven Valleys Vineyard. These represent the vineyards in which the grapes were grown. Although we at the Chadds Ford Winery grow about 25% of our grapes, a lot of the grapes are grown at other vineyards in Pennsylvania, all throughout the state. The Stargazers Vineyard happens to be in Chester County, but the Seven Valleys Vineyard is over in York County. And we have vineyards that are way out near Gettysburg and all the way up in Erie, where various people grow grapes for us and for other wineries that are going to make wine out of them. Pennsylvania is a very interesting state. In this area, we can only use grapes grown within the state, and we happen to be the only state in the country that has a law. So whenever you buy Pennsylvania wines, you can be assured that they were all grown within the state and that they were made in the state. There's lots of other interesting wines here, but the really interesting ones are the ones that we can taste upstairs. So we're going to go up to our tasting room now. Now we're upstairs in our tasting room, and this is the really fun part of visiting a winery, which is to taste the wines, learn a little bit about them, and just enjoy them.
It's a very, very young Cabernet Sauvignon, okay? Because it's going to be more aggressive, it's going to have a lot of tannin, and I'll tell you, it really goes with that meal. So that's the best wine to serve, rather than an old Cabernet Sauvignon. So these Cabernets, like the Moorhead and like the others that we have, Brandywine Valley Cabernet, have a lot of tannin still on them, and they're great right now to drink. Maybe you don't want to sit down and just sip it, but if you want to have a good steak dinner or a London broil on the grill, it's a super wine to have.
Have you all tasted this one?
Yes.
What do you think? Do you like it?
Nice. Very nice.
Excellent.
Have you all tried Pennsylvania wines before?
Yeah.
Some of us have, yeah. We've been here, a few of us have been here.
It was up to Cherry Valley.
Great. So what
When we were
all?
up in the Poconos, there were a couple of vineyards up there that were very nice.
Okay, did we finish that?
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming downhill off the meal now. Okay,
The
we
dessert.
finished our meal, and now we're going on into the dessert wines. Okay, into the sweeter wines. This is the way you do it. We don't work it backwards, because if you go from sweet up to dry, everything's going to taste very acidic to you. So next one we're going to have is our spring wine. And spring wine is the
How you like
first
that?
wine from the pressing of the 1994 grapes. And we bottle this in March, we release it in April, and that's why we call it spring wine. All right? It's a very seasonal wine. It's a great wine to consume in its youth. So it's great to consume in
Oh, so
1994.
let's have some, Frank. Get some wine in those glasses.
I'm trying to talk too much, right?
Part of what we always try and do at the winery is to teach a little bit about the wines as we pour them, so people who haven't had them before can know how to use them and what to do with them. But the fun part is to taste them. Got to get them in the glass
This is
there.
a good beach wine or a deck wine, poolside wine.
Well, that's all we do all the time.
Is that right? Nobody's teaching summer school? No.
That's sure. This one.
No, what's the difference between this and the Niagara? Which I grew up on. I like that.
Okay.
This one.
That's just, I do
The
like
Niagara is more of a
This
dessert
is-
wine than this. Okay.
Yeah.
The Niagara wine
This
that we have
very distinct.
is
Taste
a
it.
made from
This
the
one-
Niagara grape, which is a Nebraska
Yes.
grape.
But I think this is
What I do with Niagara is pour it
for
on
the
the
price.
fruit.
I would buy this
Oh,
one.
really?
Right. And let it just
That was when we
marinate,
came in.
and then just eat the fruit.
Remember when we came
Yes.
in?
And get
Get that
that
one.
sweetness.
I can imagine, like,
Yeah.
you get strawberry.
But this
Yeah,
one is really
yeah.
good. Should be, right? But I like that
Spring wine
too.
you're having right now?
Right,
I
we're
like
just
that
having the
too.
spring.
Maybe we should get a bottle. This is really nice.
So have you all gone through all of the wines? Are you finishing?
We're just finishing
We're
up.
finishing up. Yeah.
We can start again if you'd like, Lee.
No complaints here.
Hey, I think we're in the mood. Tasting is always fun.
I'm amazed you have such a big variety.
We have about
For
17
the-
to 18 different
Yeah,
wines.
it's the size of your
Right.
winery.
Oh, we're the largest winery.
In Pennsylvania,
Yes.
right now?
23,000 cases.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
We find that there's so many different kinds of wine, and that we want to make something that everybody's going to enjoy, rather than just having people come in and say, well, no, we don't have that, no, we don't have this. So we really have to represent in this one little place all the wines that are made in the world, because when you're here, you're not in a store where you can buy all these different things. So we basically mirror anything that you can buy, from the big you know, Chardonnays and Cabernets down to the light wines like Frank has in his hand, the blush.
Right.
You should tell them about the blush.
Yeah, Steuben blush is the East Coast equivalent of a white Zinfandel. Okay, so Steuben is the name of the grape. It was developed up at Cornell about 50 years ago. And it's fruitier and sweeter than a white Zin. It's a nice wine to go with brunch. It goes great with pancakes. Or just a sipping. Well, because it's sweet itself, and so with a little sweetness, they kind of compensate for each other.
I know. I love pancakes.
The only problem with working down here is get hungry.
See wine all the time?
No,
about what they're
yeah, I'll tell you,
served
You either talk about brunch, you talk about London broils.
That's true. You talk about it all day when you're talking about wine and food. Oh, it's great to see people tasting here. We love to have people come here and visit, and you can come at any time and taste wines and go on a tour of the cellar. And I noticed this group has a picnic basket over here, so I think they're going to picnic and drink some wine outside on a lovely day. And basically, that's why we want you to come here. But the real goal we have is for you to like the wines, to enjoy them, and to come out here into our retail area so where you can buy the wines. In a small boutique winery like this, we not only make wines and taste wines, but we also sell them. So you can come into our winery, the Chadds Ford Winery, or other wineries in Pennsylvania 7 days a week, and you can purchase wines to take home and enjoy at home with your dinner.